Yeah, so that's the backdrop or context. Now, against this, I make an argument that says, you really can't afford to ignore India. Despite all these challenges, if you're a global company, if you're Caterpillar, if you're McDonald's or any of these good companies, you still have to fight it out there for a couple of reasons. And the first, of course, is there aren't that many sort of big markets left anymore. China's taken off already. It's hardly an emerging market. So here's this country of $1.2 billion, getting steadily more affluent. It's a $2 trillion economy. Even if it grows 5% or 6%, that's still a substantial amount of business from the perspective of a firm. So you can't ignore it. And the other thing about this, about the Indian economy is it tends to grow in spurts, very jerkily, like a car that's jerking forward. And so if you say, hey, listen, I'll come back when the growth is back, then you tend to get frozen out. And the best example is the car industry. India is now one of the world's largest automotive markets. It's about 3 million cars, still way behind China, which is 22 million, and I hope we never get to 22 million. But, so you have, but 4 companies account for 88% of the car market in India, and that's Suzuki, Hyundai, Mahindra and Tata. And so you've got the strange phenomenon of Volkswagen and Fiat and GM and Ford and Toyota and all these guys, each with 1 or 2%, because they said, we'll come back when the market takes off. So you can't do that. You have to participate. You have to grow with the economy. And if you say, I'm going to come back, there's somebody else usually who's occupied the space. The second reason why I think big companies cannot afford to ignore India is precisely because it is chaotic, right? These things that I talk about, whether it's taxation or corruption or bad infrastructure, lousy government, all these things, they're not true of India alone. They're pretty good descriptors for most emerging markets, right? So in that sense, India is like an archetype for all emerging markets. And so if you're a global company, you don't have much of a choice. You can't say, hey, listen, I'll go to Indonesia when it's less corrupt. I'll go to India when it's less chaotic. That may not happen for a very long time. So if you want the growth, get used to chaos, okay? Make dealing with corruption into a core competence. So and I say India is the best place in the world to learn how to deal with these things, okay? Because there's a big prize, a big payoff at the end when you figure it out, because it's a good market. And then you can take what you've learned and apply it to all these other equally nutty places. So, it's quite interesting. When I began writing the book, Brazil and Indonesia was in fashion, India was out of fashion. By the time the book is out, India's coming back in fashion, those guys are in the doghouse. So that's the nature of these emerging markets. They're difficult, uneven places. And the final reason is that India is uniquely a fantastic place for a certain kind of innovation, okay? When you talk innovation, you immediately think of Apple and so forth. India is not good at that sort of stuff. It's not good at new-to-the-world kind of innovation, but it's fantastically good at taking things and stripping away everything that is non-essential and making it affordable and accessible to the next few 100 million consumers. And there are plenty of examples, right from the Arvind Eye Hospital, which can do cataract surgeries at some 1/40th the cost of the US at the same quality standards, to GE's medical devices, a $200 X-ray machine or a $400 ultrasound, etc. And if that sort of innovation is important to you, you have to be in India and use it as a lab. And so companies that have somehow persevered have developed fantastic innovations which play well around the world. And I like to use Vodafone because it's one of the most harassed global companies in India. They overpaid for the acquisition. They had to take a write-off pretty soon afterwards. They've had this running tax dispute with the government and a $2 billion tax bill hanging over them. It's not been easy. But they've figured out how to make money at 1 cent a minute, talk time. And they've taken that capability to all the other markets and have done spectacularly well. So in my book, which came out sometime last year, I said, these are reasons why, hey, you better learn how to succeed in markets like India. Now, after May 16th, which is when the new government got elected and there was this spectacular moment, I would argue there's a fourth and much more important reason, and that is, if India just does a few things right, I suspect we could be the next China, right? And my point is very simple, because China is becoming a tougher and tougher place right now. The economy is slowing, their wage costs and all costs are rising. They're becoming more belligerent both towards their neighbors as well as towards foreign companies. You've got geopolitical tensions going through the roof. So if you're Japanese companies in particular, it's a pretty anxious moment in time. So every global company is saying, hey, China will continue to be important, but we better have some other options out there. And so they've gone from a production standpoint into places like Vietnam and Bangladesh, but those are tiny countries in that sense. The big opportunity, of course, is for India. And so if at this moment when people are looking for an option, we put out a welcome mat, I think the floodgates could open in terms of investment into the country and companies eager to do business.
So what are the few things do you think India has to do here to roll out the red carpet here?
Lots of things, but I would sort of pick two or three. Number one is to make it less difficult to do business, as I said.
How do you do that?
Yeah, so India's number 134 on that list. If we can only move into double digits, if we could get to number 99, I think that would be a spectacular movement and be spectacular for Indian companies and global companies. How do you do that? If you go down the criteria in that ranking, the number one issue I think which kills companies is harassment by the tax authorities. And Prime Minister Modi talked about this as tax terrorism. So he clearly gets it. He gets how severe and acute an issue this is. Now, I think in this budget, which comes out in the first part of July, we need to see what they do. So it'll be a moment of truth, and I hope they signal all the right things. But I think they need to rein in the tax guys, and that's somewhat easier said than done because only 1% of India pays taxes. So you've got 1.2 billion people with these huge welfare programs and reckless ones riding on the backs of very few companies and very few people. So if he's going to do it, he's going to have to widen the tax base. Right. And that always is...
Will that take generations, though?
No, it takes a certain amount of political will because the people who should pay taxes and aren't paying taxes are usually politically connected. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But that would be one thing he must do. I think a second thing he's got to do is, again, get the bureaucracy to be less venal and dysfunctional. And he did a pretty good job of that in his home state of Gujarat, where he had the bureaucracy, pretty focused on doing all the right things for business, single window clearances, fast tracking approvals, and creating an open door policy so if people were in trouble, they could directly walk into his office. Now, Gujarat is a state of 65 million people. Now he's a prime minister of a country of 1.2 billion, so it's a little bit harder. But if you read all the announcements in the last 4 weeks since he took office, it's pretty encouraging. He's picked his team of bureaucrats very carefully, including reaching out into retired bureaucrats and bringing them out of retirement because they have a reputation of getting things done. He set the tone in terms of expectations. He's told babus, bureaucrats, you better be in your seat by 9 a.m., okay? And you're not supposed to tweet and go to social media and so forth, okay? And I need you to simplify things. I'm going to hold you accountable for how fast you simplify. He's asked them for what did they wish to do in their last government that they felt disempowered. So what are the big ideas where you need support? So I think it's quite positive in terms of his message to bureaucrats saying, I'm going to empower you, but I'm also going to hold you accountable. So if you don't perform, well, there'll be somebody else. So I think these are two things. The much harder issue is the rule of law. Much as India likes to say we're a democracy and we have the rule of law, I question whether we are either. Sorry. On the democracy part, I would say is somewhere in the last 50 years, we've confused having an election with what a democracy is truly about. Okay, so very few instances is it truly a government by the people and for the people. So hopefully that will begin to change now. And in terms of rule of law, we've got the worst judicial system of any major economy, right? It takes 12 years on average to justice. If it's a commercial dispute, typically the legal costs are 40% of the contract value. So only if you're insane would you actually go to the judicial system. You usually try and find some sort of settlement outside of it. That's not great if you're a global company that relies on contracts and enforceable contracts and due process as an essential component of doing business in the country. So these are things he has to do. He's got to get those infrastructure projects rolling.
Right.
And that's not terribly hard. India has a power shortage, but we have 40 mega power projects, power plants, which are ready to go, except they don't have coal. Why don't they have coal? Because the coal India can't supply them. That's because the environmental clearances are holding them up. So if you can get the log jam going, I think things could move pretty quickly. So these are some of the things which I think can make a profound difference to the investment climate and the investor sentiment.
So if you're a multinational today, are you more optimistic about doing business there?
Not yet. So first of all, it depends on what's your home country. So if you're a Japanese company, you're hugely optimistic and you're probably already there on the ground looking to expand aggressively. Why? Because of China, their problems with China on one hand, and because they're aging rapidly.